Riley never expected to face death or to stand before Jesus with every hidden sin laid bare. A devoted wife, mother, and teacher, she thought her faith was strong. But in a shocking near-death experience, she discovered the spiritual consequences of a sin she had long justified as harmless. What Jesus revealed shattered her beliefs and set her on a path to true freedom. This testimony will challenge everything you thought you knew about sin, grace, and redemption.
My name is Riley, and on the surface, my life looked picture perfect. I lived in Los Angeles, a city of bright lights and endless opportunities. I was a school teacher, a wife, and a mother to 2 beautiful children. My days were filled with lesson plans, helping students, and coming home to a loving family. I had a stable career, a supportive husband, and a faith I had always believed was unshakable. To anyone looking from the outside, I had it all: a fulfilling job, a happy home, and a strong belief in God. I went to church, prayed, and tried my best to live a good life. I wasn't perfect, but I thought I was on the right path. But behind closed doors, there was something else, something I never talked about. A hidden part of me that no one knew existed. A struggle that had followed me for years, one I had dismissed as unimportant, harmless, private. It was a battle I convinced myself didn't really matter. And yet, deep down, I felt the weight of it. There were moments of guilt, whispers of shame, but I always pushed them aside. I told myself, everyone has struggles. This isn't hurting anyone. God understands. But did he? I didn't realize how much this secret was affecting me. I didn't see how it had slowly crept into my heart, creating a wedge between me and God. It didn't feel like a big deal at first, just a habit, something to relieve stress, something I could control. But over time, I found myself going back to it more and more, as if something was pulling me in deeper. And no matter how much I prayed or promised to stop, I always fell back into it. It was a normal day when everything changed. That morning, I had woken up early, packed lunches for my kids, and hurried off to work. The day was exhausting, teaching, grading papers, answering emails, and dealing with students who barely listened. I felt drained but kept pushing forward like I always did. By the time I got home, my body was aching with exhaustion. My husband greeted me with a warm hug, the kids were playing, and dinner was already on the table. It should have been a perfect evening, but something felt off. A heaviness sat in my chest, a deep tiredness that I couldn't shake. I told myself I just needed sleep. Later that night, after tucking the kids into bed, I went through my usual routine, brushing my teeth, saying a quick prayer, and sliding under the covers. But something was different. As soon as my head hit the pillow, a strange feeling washed over me. My body felt unusually heavy, as if I were sinking into the mattress. My eyelids fluttered shut, and for a split second, I thought I was drifting off to sleep. Then, everything went black. There was no warning, no gradual fade into unconsciousness. It was as if the world around me had vanished in an instant. I couldn't move, I couldn't think. I was just gone. I don't know how long I was in that darkness. Time didn't exist. There was no sound, no feeling, no thoughts, just emptiness. I wasn't asleep, but I wasn't awake either. It was something entirely different, something I had never experienced before. And then something happened. A force pulled me forward. It wasn't painful, but it was powerful. I tried to resist, to fight against it, but I was completely powerless. It felt as if my very soul was being lifted out of my body, like I was being separated from the physical world. A deep fear gripped me. I wanted to wake up, to snap out of whatever was happening, but I couldn't. I had no control. I was leaving this world, and I knew it. And then everything changed. I was no longer in my bedroom, no longer in my body. I was somewhere else, somewhere I never expected to be, and standing before me was him.
Jesus.
At first, I thought I was dreaming, but this wasn't like any dream I had ever experienced. There was no transition, no fading in or out, just an abrupt and overwhelming darkness. I felt weightless, like I was floating in an endless void, yet at the same time, something was pulling me, dragging me forward. I had no control. My instincts screamed at me to wake up, to pull myself back, but it was useless. Whatever was happening to me, it was far beyond anything I could stop. I wasn't just unconscious. I was separated from my body. A rush of panic flooded my mind. My thoughts raced, my heart, if I still had one, pounded, and my entire being was consumed with the terrifying realization that I was no longer alive. Is this it? Am I dead? I tried to move, to turn, to grasp onto something, but there was nothing. No air, no ground, no light, just a heavy, endless emptiness. Then, as suddenly as the darkness had come, everything changed. The silence that surrounded me was replaced by something else, a deep, consuming stillness, unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the absence of everything. It felt like I had been taken out of time itself, like the entire universe had paused. And then I felt it, a presence, strong, powerful, holy. I had never felt anything like it before, yet something inside me knew exactly who it was. A brilliant light erupted before me, consuming the darkness in an instant. It wasn't harsh or blinding. It was pure, radiant, and alive. I could feel it touching every part of me, not just my skin, but my very soul. And then I saw him.
Jesus.
There are no words in any language that could fully describe him. He wasn't just there, he was everything. His presence filled the entire space around me, yet somehow, I felt like I was standing in front of someone more real, more tangible than anything I had ever known. His face shone with a brilliance I can't explain, but it wasn't just the light that struck me. It was his eyes. Eyes that held eternity. They weren't just looking at me, they were looking into me. Every thought I had ever had, every secret I had kept, every moment of my life. It was all laid bare before him. I had stood in front of crowds before. I had spoken to students, to parents, to strangers. But I had never felt so exposed. There was nowhere to hide. For the first time in my life, I realized what it meant to be completely known. Awe, fear, conviction, all at once. I wanted to fall to my knees, but I wasn't even sure if I had knees anymore. I felt like a child before a king, small and insignificant, yet at the same time, I could feel his love wrapping around me, holding me together. I expected judgment. I expected him to speak, to ask why I had come here, why my soul was so heavy. But he didn't say a word. Instead, he simply looked at me. And in that moment, I saw everything. My entire life unfolded before me, not like a distant memory, but as if I were reliving every moment, every thought, every action. Nothing was hidden. It was overwhelming. I saw the good moments, times when I had helped others, times I had shown kindness, times I had chosen faith over fear. But then, I saw the moments I had ignored, the things I had convinced myself didn't matter. And in that instant, I knew exactly what he was about to show me. A pit formed in my stomach. I wanted to look away, to turn from his gaze, but I couldn't, because I knew what was coming next. I stood there, frozen, as the vision of my life played out before me. It wasn't like watching old home videos or flipping through memories in my mind. I was reliving everything. Every moment, every decision, both big and small, was playing out with absolute clarity. At first, I saw the good moments, times when I had shown kindness, when I had been selfless, when I had chosen to lean on faith instead of fear. I saw myself praying, worshiping, encouraging others, and for a brief second, I felt relief. Maybe this won't be so bad, I thought. But then, the vision shifted. The good moments faded, and now I saw the times I had failed. I saw the moments when I had been impatient, when I had ignored the quiet nudging of the Holy Spirit, when I had chosen my desires over obedience. And then everything stopped. The vision froze at one specific sin, and my entire body tensed. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to face it. But I knew there was no escaping this moment. Masturbation. The word alone sent a wave of shame crashing over me. Of all the things I had done, of all the sins I had committed. Why this? I had always thought it was harmless, something private, something that didn't affect anyone but me. But as I stood there before Jesus, I saw the truth. This wasn't just a meaningless habit. It wasn't an innocent indulgence. It was a chain, and I had been wearing it for years. As the vision unfolded, I saw every time I had given in to this temptation. But Jesus wasn't just showing me what I did. He was showing me what happened spiritually each time I did it. I gasped as I saw it, a courtroom in the spiritual realm. I watched as the enemy, the accuser, stood before God, pointing directly at me. Look at her, the enemy sneered. She calls herself a follower of Christ, yet she chooses this sin over you. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to say, that's not fair. I didn't mean for it to be like this. But the evidence was right in front of me. Every time I justified it, every time I told myself it wasn't a big deal, the enemy used it against me. Every time I fell into it, I was unknowingly opening doors for spiritual attack. The vision zoomed in closer, and I saw myself after indulging in the act. How afterward, I always felt a strange heaviness. I thought it was just guilt, but now I saw what it really was. It was spiritual bondage. Each time I gave in, I was weakening my relationship with God. I was building a wall between us, brick by brick. Tears filled my eyes as I saw how this sin had invited spiritual oppression into my life. I had always wondered why I struggled so much with anxiety, why I felt disconnected in prayer, why I sometimes felt like God was distant. Now I knew. I had given the enemy legal ground in my life, and I hadn't even realized it. I felt like I couldn't breathe. How could I have been so blind? I wanted to look away, to hide from this truth, but Jesus' gaze held me in place. Not with anger, not with condemnation, but with truth and love. He wasn't showing me this to hurt me. He was showing me because he wanted me to be free. And then he spoke. This was never meant to have power over you, Jesus said gently. His words cut through me like a blade, exposing the lie I had believed for so long. You thought it was harmless, but it was stealing from you. It was keeping you from me. I sobbed, the weight of my sin crushing me. I didn't know, I whispered. I didn't know it was this serious. He looked at me with such love, but there was no denying the truth in his eyes. You knew, he said. You always knew. That's why you hid it. That's why you felt ashamed. But you convinced yourself it didn't matter. I wanted to crumble. He was right. I had always felt the guilt, but instead of dealing with it, I buried it. I had told myself God understood, that he didn't care about the small things. But now, standing here in his presence, I realized there were no small sins. Everything mattered. Every choice, every action, every thought, they all shaped who I was and who I was becoming. And I had been choosing something that kept me in chains. I saw the countless times God had tried to warn me. The moments when my spirit had felt uneasy. The times when I had heard a sermon that convicted me, but I ignored it. The nights when I felt distant from God, but instead of asking why, I just assumed he was being silent. He had been speaking all along, I just wasn't listening. The realization hit me like a wave, knocking the breath from my soul. Oh God, what have I done? Tears streamed down my face as the weight of it all sank in. I had spent so many years asking God to come closer, to help me feel his presence, to give me peace. And all along, I had been the one pushing him away. Jesus took a step closer, his presence radiating pure love, and I braced myself for the words I feared most. You have gone too far. You are beyond saving. I can't help you anymore. But he never said those things. Instead, he did something that shocked me to my core. He reached out his hand, and in the gentlest voice, he said, "You don't have to live like this anymore." I stared at his outstretched hand, my body trembling under the weight of everything I had just seen. I had expected anger, maybe even rejection. After all, I had spent years choosing sin over obedience, convincing myself that my actions were insignificant. I had let this habit take root in my life, pretending it wasn't affecting me. And yet, here he was, not with a voice of condemnation, not with disgust or disappointment, but with love. You don't have to live like this anymore, Jesus said again. his voice steady, firm, yet filled with a tenderness I had never known before. His words cut through me, but not like a blade of judgment. Instead, like a light breaking through darkness. "This isn't who you are." Tears streamed down my face. I had spent so long believing this sin was part of me, something I could never truly be free from. It had become woven into my identity, something I carried like a secret burden, too ashamed to face it fully. But here was Jesus standing before me, saying, "This is not who you are. I have already made a way for you to be free." I let out a sob I didn't know I had been holding in. I had prayed for freedom before. I had begged God to help me stop, to take the temptation away. But the truth was, I had never truly surrendered. I had always held on to it, justifying it, minimizing it. Now, for the first time, I saw my sin for what it really was. And I saw that Jesus had never abandoned me, even in my worst moments. As I stood there, something incredible happened. The weight I had carried for years, the shame, the guilt, the spiritual heaviness, began to lift. It was as if Jesus was physically peeling it away layer by layer. For the first time in years, I could breathe. Then, without warning, everything changed. The vision around me shifted, and suddenly, I saw two different versions of my life. On one side, I saw myself if I continued down the same path. I saw years of struggling with the same guilt, the same cycle of sin, the same emptiness. I saw myself growing more distant from God, my prayers feeling hollow, my faith growing weaker. I saw how this one small sin had opened bigger doors, allowing other compromises to creep in. I saw the enemy still standing in that spiritual courtroom, still using my sin as evidence against me, still holding power over me because I refused to surrender. I looked at that version of myself, and for the first time, I realized, that's not living. That's bondage. Then I turned to the other side, and what I saw took my breath away. It was me fully free. I saw myself walking in spiritual strength, no longer burdened by guilt, no longer chained by secret shame. I saw myself praying with boldness, worshiping with joy, experiencing God's presence in a way I never had before. I saw how pure and light my soul felt, how the enemy had lost his grip on me. I saw how my relationship with God had completely transformed. The contrast was staggering. On one side, a life of spiritual oppression, distance, and guilt. On the other, a life of peace, joy, and complete freedom. And in that moment, the truth hit me like a tidal wave. I had the power to choose. Jesus had already made the way. The door to freedom had always been open, but I had to step through it. I looked back at him, still standing before me, his hand still outstretched. The choice was mine. Would I hold on to my sin, allowing it to define me? Or would I surrender it completely and step into the freedom he was offering? A lump formed in my throat. I knew this was the moment everything would change. I had spent so long fighting this battle, but in reality, the battle had already been won. All I had to do was let go. With everything in me, I reached out and took Jesus' hand. And in that instant, I felt it all break off. The weight, the chains, the lies, gone. And for the first time in my life, I knew what it felt like to be completely free. Suddenly, everything around me began to fade. The radiant light, the vision of my two possible futures, even the overwhelming presence of Jesus, it all blurred into nothingness. And then I was falling. It wasn't a painful fall, but it was fast, like I was being pulled backward at an impossible speed. My soul, which had felt weightless just moments ago, was now being dragged back into my body. Then, a sharp gasp. My eyes flew open, my chest rising violently as if I had been underwater for too long. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, my lungs burned, and for a moment, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. I was back. I was alive. But everything was different. The room was the same, my bed, my nightstand, the soft glow of the digital clock reading 3:47 a.m. But I was not the same. I squeezed my hands into fists, then released them. My body felt light, not just physically, but spiritually. The weight I had carried for years, the shame, the guilt, the invisible chains that had bound me for so long, were gone. I sat up slowly, running a shaky hand through my hair. I expected to feel some kind of lingering shame, some last trace of temptation pulling me back. But there was nothing.
No heaviness, no tormenting thoughts.
Just peace. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and sat there for a moment, breathing deeply, taking in the new reality I had stepped into. I had spent years convincing myself that masturbation was harmless, that it was just a private struggle, something I could deal with on my own. But now I saw it for what it truly was. A trap. A lie the enemy had whispered into my heart. A chain I had willingly bound myself with, not realizing how much it was destroying me. And yet, God had never given up on me. He had never turned away, never stopped calling me back, even when I refused to listen, even when I ignored the conviction, even when I excused my actions. He had waited, because he didn't just want me to stop sinning. He wanted me to be free. Tears welled up in my eyes as the depth of his grace sank in. I had spent so long feeling trapped, believing I would never break free, that this sin would always be a part of me. But it wasn't, and it never had to be. I got up from the bed and knelt on the floor, my hands trembling as I whispered the only words I could manage. "Thank you, Jesus." A warmth filled my chest, and in that moment, I knew the enemy no longer had a hold on me. He had lost his claim, because I had chosen surrender over secrecy. I had chosen truth over lies. I had chosen Jesus over bondage. And that was the greatest freedom I had ever known. As I knelt there in the quiet stillness of my bedroom, I realized something life-changing. True freedom doesn't come from simply trying harder. It doesn't come from making promises to do better. It doesn't come from hiding our struggles in shame. It comes from facing the truth, fully, honestly, and without excuses. It comes from surrender. The sins we think are private, they're not. The habits we justify as harmless, they're not. Every choice we make either draws us closer to God or pulls us further away. There is no neutral ground. For years, I had believed that what I did in secret didn't matter. But now I understood. Everything matters. Every decision, every action, every thought, and most importantly, every opportunity to choose freedom. I had been given a second chance. Not because I earned it, not because I deserved it, but because God's grace is always available. We just have to be willing to accept it. And I would never take that grace for granted again. If you've made it this far, I want to ask you something. What are you holding on to that's keeping you from true freedom? Is there something in your life that you've been justifying? Something you've convinced yourself is harmless? Maybe it's the same sin I struggled with. Maybe it's something different. But deep down, you already know it's pulling you away from God. I know what it feels like to live with a secret burden, to push down conviction and pretend it doesn't matter. I know what it's like to feel trapped in a cycle, ashamed, afraid to admit that something has control over you. But let me tell you the truth. You don't have to stay there. I thought I was beyond help. I thought I would carry this struggle with me for the rest of my life. I thought God had given up on me, but He didn't. And if He could set me free, He can do the same for you. I need you to understand something. Every single day, you are making a choice. You are either choosing to step closer to God, or you are choosing to stay stuck in bondage. There is no middle ground. I learned that the hard way. For years, I convinced myself that my sin wasn't a big deal because no one knew about it. I told myself this isn't hurting anyone. God understands. But in reality, it was hurting me. It was slowly pulling me away from God, dulling my spiritual senses, keeping me trapped in a cycle of guilt and defeat. What about you? What sin have you excused in your life? What hidden struggle have you convinced yourself is harmless? What would your life look like if you finally let go? I want you to really think about that. Because the enemy doesn't care how small your sin seems. He just wants you to stay comfortable enough to never break free. But Jesus? He wants more for you. He wants freedom for you. And that freedom is waiting, but you have to choose it. If there's one thing I need you to hear today, it's this: you are not too far gone. I don't care how long you've struggled. I don't care how many times you've failed. I don't care if you think it's too late. Because I stood in the presence of Jesus with all my sin exposed, and do you know what he told me? This isn't who you are. I have already made a way for you to be free. And he is saying the same thing to you right now. But you have to make a choice. You have to face the truth. You have to be willing to surrender. I won't lie to you. This won't be easy. The enemy will try to convince you that your sin is too small to matter or too big to be forgiven. But the enemy is a liar. And the truth is, Jesus already won your freedom on the cross. The only thing left for you to do is accept it. So, I'm asking you right now, are you willing to finally let go? Be honest with yourself. Stop pretending it doesn't matter. If it's affecting your relationship with God, it matters.
Confess it to God.
Don't hold back. Tell him everything. He already knows, and he's not going to turn away from you. Repent and surrender. That means more than just saying sorry. It means making the decision to walk away from sin and ask for his help. Fill yourself with God's presence. Read the word, pray, worship. The more time you spend with God, the less power sin has over you. Don't fight alone. The enemy loves isolation. Find people who can pray with you, encourage you, and hold you accountable. If you do these things, freedom will come. Because Jesus doesn't just want you to be better, he wants you to be completely free. I need you to understand something. You don't have forever. There is coming a day when we will all stand before Jesus, just like I did. And when that moment comes, you won't be able to make excuses. You won't be able to say, I didn't know. Because now you do. You have a choice.
Right now.
You can walk away from this moment and go back to life as usual. You can pretend this wasn't meant for you. You can keep carrying that secret burden, keep justifying that sin.
Or
you can take the first step toward freedom today. You can make the decision to finally let go, to stop running, to step into the life Jesus is offering you. And I promise you, you won't regret it. If this message spoke to you, I want to invite you to do something. Don't keep this to yourself. There are people out there just like you, people who are struggling, who feel alone, who are convinced they can never be free. But we are not meant to fight these battles in silence. So I encourage you, leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, your testimony, or even just a simple, I need prayer. Like and subscribe. Not because I need numbers, but because this message needs to reach more people. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. You never know, this could be the thing that sets them free. We are in this together. You are not alone. You are not beyond help. And you are not meant to live in bondage. Freedom is waiting. All you have to do is take the first step. Will you? I thought I was beyond help, but Jesus showed me the truth. And if he can set me free, he can do the same for you. Take that first step today. I promise you won't regret it.